Oh, hello. So I think this is our fourth attempt now. I'm Aaron Campbell, and with me is
I'm Robert Randall, and we are a couple of Luddites trying to make YouTube work for us.
yeah, YouTube work through Patreon.
Mm-hmm. Yup. So if all is going well, you can. What is that not working?
Okay, hold on, because I'm getting all kinds of feedback.
What do you mean?
No, it's playing somewhere, and I got to figure out where.
Okay.
Ah, there it is. There it is. Let's close that. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I had the YouTube page open, and so I was getting feedback. It was like everybody was like we were each talking to me at twice.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry everybody. We're still working the kinks out in this. We've got an announcement coming, and we're trying to make sure that we have all of the technical stuff worked out. So we're just confirming that everything is working correctly, and we'll get to that announcement in a couple minutes or a minute or two, whatever. So yeah, if you're watching this afterwards, you can kind of scrub forward a little bit. So I am just going to confirm that the Patreon feed is actually functioning, and it is. Oh, yeah, it's working, and there's only a little bit of lag, so I'm going to pause that, and we can go.
Okay,
We
cool.
got it. I think
Hooray! Yay!
Finally.
Okay, success.
Jesus.
Did you write down everything that you did?
Yeah. Well, we're doing it again tomorrow, so
Mm-hmm.
hopefully it stays fresh in my mind. Okay, so you don't know. We've been for an hour now. We've been trying to get this thing ready, and it's like every time we do, I realize there's one little thing that I didn't tick.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I think we've got it going good. Okay, so having said that, we will let me take a drink of my seltzer water. Let me calm my nerves a little bit, because I'm talking a mile a minute right now, and say, I am Aaron Campbell.
And I'm Robert Randall.
And we are the co-hosts of Adventure Hook, which is a podcast. If you're listening to this, I'm sure you already know, because you're probably just one of our 7 Patreons that we have right now. But if you're not, and you've stumbled upon this by happenstance, Adventure Hook is a podcast that Rob and I do. We are both a couple of comic book pros, and we play D&D. We're dungeon masters, and every episode we take a simple idea for a role-playing game, either an adventure or an entire campaign, or just a little scenario, and we flesh that out into what amounts to almost a full story, or as much of a full story as we can get in an hour and a half, but something that's playable, something that as a DM you can take and you can plug into your own games, and you can expand it however you desire. But what you are watching right now is the announcement that we were making for our new live stream show that is going to be Patreons or patrons only, which we're calling Legend Lore. And we've been trying to figure this out for the first year of the show, trying to figure out exactly what Legend Lore should be. And originally it was kind of us just like recapping our own games at home. But it amounted to a much larger show than the actual podcast, and we just didn't have the time or resources to be able to put an entirely second show together. So we decided, what's a way that we can do a show that requires no editing, and that is a live stream. And we finally got it figured out, thank God. And we've also decided that we are going to change the sort of the intent of the show itself. So Legend Lore, as you can see by the clues behind me, we are going to focus on Ravenloft. And our idea is that we are going to focus this entire year of 2019 on a deep dive, like what could amount to a master's class or a master class, where we talk about Ravenloft as a campaign setting. And we also do a massive redux, updating a ton of the content for 5th edition. And that includes Curse of Strahd. And we can talk a little bit about our our ideas behind why we think that a new game, a new hardcover adventure campaign like Curse of Strahd could benefit from some reduxing. So I don't know, Rob, if you had anything to add to that.
Well, I mean, we've both been very old school Ravenloft fans. I mean, I'm playing since the early 90s when a lot of these books that we're talking about revamping were actually published, so been fans since then. And it's gone through many iterations. Certainly the setting has changed because there's been a lot of people, a lot of different, figures in that pie, so to speak. And it's interesting to see like what evolved, what changed, what stayed, what went away and what came back, and all that kind of stuff is all interesting. But sometimes I feel like some of the material in its various iterations, by losing stuff from the past, they lost like some good stuff, like core stuff, and even like things that really shouldn't have been ignored. Like you start to lose some of the fabric, quote unquote, of Ravenloft if you like are ignoring some of these very canon sort of characters or events, or to just try to. And also it seems like a lot of the reimaginings that have gone into the newer editions, while interesting, are divert from a lot of those old core Gothic classic ideas of the romanticism of that made Ravenloft kind of what it was. And so like I think while we still want to stay true to the new editions and all that stuff is very, very cool, but we want to also look back and in a way synthesize old editions and new together into something even more textured and involved and rich and dark and philosophical and metaphysical and all the other stuff that we do, as well as tying it into some of the larger concepts that Aaron and I have made sort of cornerstones of our game, sort of answering key questions about things like the Cthulhu mythos, for instance, and how that relates to the Ravenloft world, like in a very, very key way, and how you can play with these ideas and utilize them in your own games, and really even maybe introduce some new concepts too that you might find fun or challenging.
I mean, I especially have this feeling that had it not been for the lawsuits placed against TSR back in the day by Arkham House to stop them from using the Cthulhu mythos in Dungeons and Dragons, which was a frivolous lawsuit. Like there was no legal basis behind it, but TSR didn't want to. They didn't want to deal with the financial ramifications of a long drawn out legal battle, so they just decided to say screw it and we'll get rid of all the Cthulhu mythos. If that had not happened, I really kind of firmly believe that that idea of the weird would have been more prevalent in Ravenloft itself, especially Mask of the Red Death, which takes place in a Gothic Earth, and the Red Death is this kind of just amorphous evil that pervades the world, which feels very Cthulian. But by then, they weren't using the Cthulhu mythos, so a lot of the storylines that feel very Lovecraftian can be much more Lovecraftian.
Oh, definitely.
So at any rate, but before we get too deep into the weeds, I figured maybe we would kind of talk about some of the actual content that we are going to be using as the foundation for this sort of masterclass. So as I said, this is all starting with Curse of Strahd. So and we're all familiar with this, I think, at this point, or a lot of us are, at least know that this book exists. In terms of, I don't know how many people, and I know a lot of people, especially in the podcasting, actual gameplay world, have been running this, and I am running this game right now, or aspects of it, in my own campaign with my friends, my weekly game, which is wrapped up in a very Cthulian type of game. My conceit, I'm not going to go into my game, but the conceit of my game is that since the Great Old Ones and the Cthulhu mythos has returned to 5th edition, that my campaign has been about the return of the Cthulhu mythos and how the Cthulhu mythos returns. And so when Curse of Strahd came out, I am a old fan of Ravenloft, and so I've been working to figure out how to fit Curse of Strahd into that idea of the Cthulhu mythos. So at any rate, sort of my original conception for doing this is that even though there is a ton of great content in this, and what Curse of Strahd really is in itself a redux of the original Ravenloft module right here, which is very small. I mean, it's only 32 pages, and it really only focuses on a very small portion of Barovia, or rather, Barovia at the time was much smaller. And so you're only in the village of Barovia and the castle and a couple areas sort of along the route that goes from the village of Barovia up to the castle itself. This was then, reduxed again in 3rd edition with Expeditions to Castle Ravenloft. And in here, they expanded it because by this point, you have the Realms of Terror box set that's come out. You have Domains of Dread 2nd edition. You have Domains of Dread 3rd edition. So you have all this new content, and they've expanded Barovia. And so this expands on some things, but then this really expands this original content. And even though Barovia here is smaller than it was in the Domains of Dread, it is much larger than the original module. But as I've been running this, I've started to realize that in their attempt to maintain the original spirit of the original module, which is kind of very sandboxy, it has become very sandboxy, and there are a lot of loose threads in terms of like the way different areas, different characters and NPCs all kind of relate to each other and fit together, and the overall narrative. Like, there's not really a cohesive single story that runs through the entire thing. It's just like, here's Kresk, and here's the Abbot, here's the Washters and Valakoviches and Valaki, here's Baba Lysaga, here's the Amber Temple, and all of these things are kind of tangentially related to each other, but the story threads, like what happened in Kresk, does not really impact why Strahd is who he is, and that under that narrative, like what it is really is, it's a place to get items to help you destroy Strahd, ultimately. And so the idea that I had was to look to some of the old content. So for instance, we're going to be using, like, all these books I've shown you, these are books we're going to be drawing sources from. So we're definitely going to be looking at the original one just historically. We're going to be looking at the second redux of the Ravenloft adventure to see how they expanded. And then we're going to look to see how this, ended up kind of developing to here through all of the other material, and seeing what's changed. And that's going to be a lot of stuff what we talk about in our show tomorrow, the 26th of February, 2019. In which we kind of talk a little bit about the history of the development of this world and this system, and how it's expanded, and all the changes that have been made. So we're going to be looking at that. We're going to be looking at Domains of Dread. We're going to be looking at Mask of the Red Death, which is Ravenloft and Gothic Earth. We're going to be, and the ultimate goal then becomes updating all of this content for 5th edition. How can we tie these threads? Like, for instance, the second Ravenloft module that came out, which is a kind of sequel. It can be a sequel, or the idea was it could also have been played together with the original module. It was called The House on Griffin Hill. And I don't have a hard copy of that anywhere, but I have it in PDF. And we're going to be talking about how we can take those very interesting events from that module, which does a lot to expand the story and the character of Strahd, and bring that into Curse of Strahd, because there's some really interesting stuff in that module that I think just kind of got disregarded over time and forgotten about. Even though I think that House on Griffin Hill was probably the inspiration for Mask of the Red Death and Gothic Earth itself. Man, I'm rambling right now. Rob, do you have anything to add?
Well, no, I mean, you've covered it. That's basically, we've got more books than this too. I mean, we've got, everything from the Van Richten guides to, modules and adventures and all kinds of stuff that we can pull out and dust off and use for inspiration. One little key, line from one book is enough. And speaking of books, there's of course also, the Ravenloft novels that we might take a look at too. Books like I Strahd and books like that, which we may be able to farm for more details. We always like the challenge of sticking to canon wherever possible. If it was in print or in a previous edition or something like that, if we can use it or stick to it or keep its name, we will, or at least find a way to explain away why it's not what was printed there or whatever. All that kind of stuff is fun, but ultimately, I mean, this could be good for you guys. I mean, Aaron and I have played Ravenloft for a very, very, very long time, and while there are obviously always going to be people who have read more or done more or played more, I feel like we've got a pretty good grasp on both the core setting as well as the metaphysical ideas that tie it together, which is what makes Ravenloft so compelling in the first place. And so that is something that you could come along with us for this ride, this masterclass, as we basically teach you not just what you would need to know to make Ravenloft kick ass, but what you can do to make it say something with your campaign.
And and that's the thing too. I tell people constantly, people who are standoffish about 5th edition and miss they have this intense nostalgia for 2nd edition, and that's all of this stuff back here, Mask of the Red Death, that's all Ravenloft really came into its own in 2nd edition. 3rd edition kind of updated some 2nd edition stuff. It didn't create a ton of new content, and then 4th edition Ravenloft was ignored completely. There is no 4th edition Ravenloft setting or book, at least that I've never been able to find. And so one of the things that I think is interesting about Ravenloft, and it makes it a difficult game to bring into new editions, is the fact that it is probably the only D&D campaign setting that every time a new edition comes out, it gets reset. Basically, Whereas Forgotten Realms, every edition basically brings it forward in time.
Yeah, just another 10 years later, and here's what's happened since the last time we did this. I think that's actually something too that we were kind of kicking around talking about. We may as well tease it here. Aaron and I have an explanation why Ravenloft keeps getting retconned over and over and over, and why history seems to change, and why things don't necessarily seem to line up. We can actually take the quote unquote bad writing of it and turn it into something eerie. Which is, I think, what we really want to try to do throughout this as well, and I think that'll be fun.
But by bad writing, I think we mean the idea that it keeps getting retconned and restarted over and over again.
Right. Well, the way
where the threads don't match and things like that. Exactly. Tying the threads together.
That's
So I'm trying to think. I lost my train of thought.
Well, right. We weren't trying to be shitty to the previous writers or anything like that. We love the setting. We love
because the thing to keep in mind is that Ravenloft was created by D&D royalty, by Tracy and Laura Hickman. So, and what they ended up creating, even though there's this is really thin. When you compared to the way adventures are written nowadays, this is literally very thin. There's not a lot of content here. And even though originally Ravenloft a lot of Ravenloft was built on puns, and but what Tracy and Laura Hickman made was probably the most compelling character in the history of the Dungeons and Dragons world. I mean, that's my opinion. I think that Strahd I think Strahd is the only other character that I personally feel can kind of compete with Strahd is Drizzt Do'Urden.
As far as the fan base, yeah. But I would say that yes, in a way, you could say that Strahd resonates with the same kind of level of gravitas that Dracula does, and that's kind of another thing I think we want to.
Yeah, we want to talk about some correlations between. Well, obviously, Strahd is a Dracula surrogate,
right?
But we wanted to talk about some theories we have about the Francis Ford Coppola movie.
Right.
Well, but
we'll save that
probably
for another time.
It's probably a ripoff of Ravenloft that somehow went unnoticed. But yeah, so one thing we want to talk about then is how the Ravenloft setting is different from others in the fact that it kind of gets reset over and over, and how now in 5th edition what they wanted to do because sort of the core mission of 5th edition was bringing the whole system back to its roots. And obviously they couldn't do that with things like Forgotten Realms because there is such a strong history, but because of the fact that Ravenloft exists outside of time and space, and it can draw into it from across time, then it makes it a setting where you kind of have to restart. Otherwise you get into like superhero like time or like the whole superhero soap opera where like things are constant, like they keep building and building and things just become so unbelievable and convoluted that it no longer starts to make much sense. And so if you want to keep things centered around this like incredibly ambiguous and mysterious character of Strahd, you kind of have to keep resetting. So we have theories too, like it's my personal belief that WotC has in their pocket or in the back of their mind the idea of developing all of the domains of dread. And there are certain reasons, I think, for that, based on just like how certain NPCs within Curse of Strahd are set up, which suggests that they've already perhaps been in other domains. But they haven't gotten around to that yet, and who knows if they're going to, because the way that they roll out content is quite a bit different from the way that content was rolled out in the past. So whether or not they choose to do that or not, we decided, hell, let's go ahead and do it ourselves. So so having said that, I mean, I hope that our rambling here hasn't like deterred you and actually has gotten you interested in what we're thinking of doing with this. And I don't know if you have even a clear grasp of what it is that we're thinking of doing with this.
Why don't we tell them a little bit about what we're planning to do tomorrow, right?
Okay,
so tomorrow
go ahead.
Well, tomorrow I think we were planning on doing the first deep dive into the Castle Ravenloft stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Discussing what came before, what's come after, what changed, what stayed the same, what maybe went back to older versions. And then I think you wanted me to kind of take a little bit of a deep dive into the Taraka deck, right? Which is basically the tarot deck of the Ravenloft world, which I'm, as an occultist myself, I know the tarot, the actual tarot, and drawing correlations between them. I found some interesting things. Let's just say I found some interesting things, and it'll be fun to talk about, if nothing else, as far as like what you can do with it in a gaming setting,
So yeah, and that's like when you read the original module, it's interesting. There's an aspect to the Taraka deck that got lost, and I'm not sure why that was taken out, because that aspect of the Taraka deck created the core of the story. And it's the same in House on Griffin Hill, the sequel. In there, they use mesmerism instead of the Taraka deck to set up all of the moving bits and pieces, the key elements. And in the same way, it also sets up the core story thread, which has disappeared from Curse of Strahd. I'm not quite sure why they chose to do that, but we're going to talk about that a little bit. But the other thing we're going to talk about is like right now what the Taraka deck has always been, without going, because we're going to talk about this tomorrow, so without going into too much, what the Taraka deck has always been is basically just a device used to place magic items around Barovia for the players to find, which they can use to destroy Strahd. So what we've done is, in our own games, is bring back some of that, the idea of the mysticism and the prophetic into the Taraka deck in a way that where it will speak to your character's motivations as well.
Oh yeah, And actually, one little quick aside, if you don't mind, the other show that I do, aside from Adventure Hook, is my actual play podcast, Blackspire, and I actually included the Taraka deck in one of the episodes where we used it as a story device. Basically, what we drew as the cards informed the following scenes, and it was pretty interesting. So go ahead and check out. That would be episode 13 for those keeping track.
Yeah. So there's that, and then what I'm going to do tomorrow, in addition to both of us talking about the history of the development of the setting itself, and how it's changed through time during the different iterations, is I'm going to talk specifically about what is new in Curse of Strahd, what is old, and what is different. So because it has, I mean, it's weird. They brought back some of the punniness from the original, which I think was, I understand that they were wanting to tap into that old nostalgia and expand on the original, like keep the original as close to the original as possible, and then expand it out so that you can bring old players back to the table with some new content. But I don't, I like, even in the original one, I don't agree that there should be a single pun in the World of Darkness. It's puns are, I despise puns, and this might just be my personal opinion.
I think,
but I just don't think it fits for horror.
For sure. Yeah, obvious puns. Sure.
Yeah, and most of those puns can be found in the crypt of Castle Ravenloft. But yeah, I like what they did in the 3rd edition version, because they got rid of all of those puns, and they changed names and they added depth. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, and then we're not going to do much in the way of like suggestions tomorrow. It's going to be more of just we're gonna give you some good lessons, some good I don't want to call it a lecture because that sounds boring, but we're going to talk about just the setting in general, and I'm getting all fucking Jesus. Okay. So but yeah, and then we'll discuss too a little bit about our intentions about how we plan to take Curse of Strahd and build on it by adding continuity within the timeline of the story itself. Discuss a little bit about, there's an idea, if you're not familiar with Ravenloft, of the Grand Conjunction. The Grand Conjunction was this event that brought all of these disparate domains of dread that were lost in the mists, domains like Barovia, all together into a core and created a large
actually, that's
setting.
Not exactly correct. The Grand Conjunction, Conjunction was actually the opposite of what you're talking about.
Right.
The core had already formed. The Grand Conjunction was for all of the disparate domains to go back to where they came from originally. So Barovia would go back to where it had come from, whatever mysterious, inscrutable place or whatever. So that's that. But of course, that failed. Thanks to some intrepid heroes, of course. But
So we're going to talk a little bit about that again, and we're going to talk about how, like I said, the core content is going to be Curse of Strahd, House on Griffin Hill, and Mask of the Red Death, and expanding the world through those, and then also Domains of Dread, whatever iteration. I mean, there's not a huge difference between the content in the story content in 2nd edition and 3rd edition, as far as I remember, off the top of my head. But
they added some cool stuff For sure. Like one of our favorite additions was when Vecna showed up in
right.
Ravenloft.
Yeah.
That was a fun little add-in. They tweaked some of the stuff about the rules of the Islands of Terror and clusters started to form. Basically, new cores started to form. That kind of stuff is all very, very cool. And we can get into that stuff too.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
So without belaboring the point, I think too much more. I think we've covered the bullet points of what we're thinking for this. So, like I said, we're going to start with sort of a historical survey of the setting itself, and then we're going to start diving into the actual story of Curse of Strahd itself and what we want to build on, what we think could use some changes and alterations, and then how to incorporate things like House on Griffin Hill, Mask of the Red Death, and then the rest of the core. Because, like I said, it's my belief that WotC is operating under the assumption that the rest of the core does exist. You just don't know it yet.
Right.
Strahd,
the mists simply just haven't rolled back yet to reveal it.
Yeah,
but it's right there, 5 feet away.
I mean,
or whatever.
The fact that Van Richten is in Barovia and it says that he has been traveling his whole life fighting vampires and other monstrosities of the night implies that there is perhaps, I mean, either he's from the world that he came from, or that he's been, moving throughout the core itself throughout his life. So, at any rate, I guess the final thing we should talk about is sort of how this is all going to function. So right now, this video, this little announcement we're doing, this long announcement that we're doing right now, is open to the public for everybody. But and then I was thinking, I actually haven't talked to you about this yet, Rob, that tomorrow's video we make public also. That way you get everybody can come and watch it, listen to it. If you want to watch it live, then you can make comments, and we will try our best to answer whatever we can and stay engaged during that. Just as to give you an idea of what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and whether or not you like looking at our faces for the rest of the year. Right. And from there on out, the show will then become patron only. The live streams will be unlisted. We have different tiers. There are 2 high tiers on our Patreon page, Expert and Realm of Terror are the 2 tiers that will get access to the live stream itself. And the difference here is, and when we just launched the Realm of Terror tier today, the Expert tier is $5 a month. And what that's going to give you access is the show once we recorded it. So you can come in, listen, watch it after the fact. Once we've completed it, it'll be uploaded onto our Patreon page, and you can get access to it. For $3 extra a month, for $8, you get the Realm of Terror tier. And at that level, you will be directly patched into our live stream as it's happening. So you can write comments as we're going along, and we can answer as we're going along, or yell at people who are jackasses, making stupid comments to us. Hopefully that doesn't happen, because you're a patron.
You're not jackasses. How could you possibly be a jackass?
If you signed up at $8 just to troll us, I mean, I don't know. I guess that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, and then not only that, but all of our supplemental material that we create from this, because like I said, I've already been doing a lot of reduxing in my own campaign, and a lot of that stuff is going to get incorporated. For example, the way that I run Curse of Strahd now, the hook, the thing that gets you into all of the intrigue happening within Barovia, is through the Death House. And the Death House was just kind of a dungeon crawl that they put in the appendix as a way to get first level characters to 3rd level, so they could start actually engaging with Barovia as a whole. because it's technically, I think, third level is where you're supposed to start. So it was created for that, and that house is actually in Barovia, the village of Barovia. Now I took it and I moved it to Vallaki because my characters came in on the opposite side of Barovia. They came in on the side where Kresge is on the west, and Vallaki is right smack dab in the middle. And I didn't really want them to go to Kresge first. I wanted to get them to the Death House in Vallaki because the Death House, I decided, intertwines and wraps up this centuries-old feud between the Vlachoviches, who are the current rulers of Vallaki, and the Watchters, who are the rival family in Vallaki, the ones who see themselves as allied with Strahd, versus the Vlachoviches, who see themselves standing against Strahd, though they're all nuts. And so the Death House becomes House Watchter, and it's within the Death House that you start to learn all of the subtle intrigue that has been going on between these two houses for like close to 400 years, and how that all relates back to Strahd himself and the land itself, and how these two families and their feud have helped shaped the entire environment politically and socially within Barovia,
and the greater core to come.
Yeah, and I'll hold on just a second. I'll give me just a moment. Okay, so like, for instance, this is a thing I created, and I have digital versions of this. I'm going to make PDFs of once we get to this, and everybody who is a Realm of Terror tier supporter is going to get access to this. This is the Watchter family tree. So this is the Watchter family tree, which I created as a way to like, all of this intrigue is happening amongst all of these different individuals, and the way that the Watchter and the Vlachoviches get intertwined with each other in and out throughout history, and so on and so forth. And there's all this other stuff, all this other content that we created. So that's all going to be part of that you'll end up getting access to. In addition, we've been talking about taking Mask of the Red Death and doing a complete update for 5th edition, where we bring back non-weapon proficiencies, because you can't really play Mask of the Red Death without non-weapon proficiencies. You got to have them. I mean, you got to be able to be a chemist or a criminologist or a journalist, and you got to be able to have those very specific skills that just don't function in regular 5th edition. You don't. We'll talk about sort of our ideas about how skills function right now in 5th edition. I personally wish there were still non-weapon proficiencies, but with Mask of the Red Death, definitely got to have them. So we're going to do some 5th edition non-weapon proficiency rules. We're going to do updates to the character classes in Mask of the Red Death, background updates, a bunch of stuff we're going to do some updates for when we get there. There, because I think Mask of the Red Death, it'll take us a few episodes to get to that point, because Mask of the Red Death won't come in until we get to House on Griffin Hill. Right. I think that's it. So yeah, I mean, if this at all intrigues you, please go to our Patreon page. It's Adventure Hook, and check out our tiers there. So, join us and come along. Hopefully we can get more people interested and involved. And you can follow us on Twitter. I'm at OlManCampbell. That's OLMAN Man Campbell. And Rob is at the Reliquum. And our podcast Twitter feed is just at Adventure Hook. That's the easiest way to get in touch with both of us. And I don't know, anything else to add, Rob?
Not really. I mean, this sounds exciting. I mean, Ravenloft, I mean, obviously we all have, our special place in our heart for the different campaign settings, from Forgotten Realms to, I don't know, Council of Worms to Dark Sun to whatever, but like Planescape, Spelljammer, and Ravenloft were always my favorites.
Mhm.
And Ravenloft perhaps the most of those three, just because, you know, the gothic flavor always, you know, especially when I was a, you know, gothy high school teenager. You know, I was all into it then too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yep.
I think we're good. I think that's it. I think that covered the bases.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I hope that you just take some time, check out our Patreon page. And if this all interests you, please, you know, sign up. And at the same time, make sure to check out our normal podcast.
Right.
We had an episode just dropped today, episode 19, the former God's religion, where a group of individuals, a group of PCs, encounters a crazy old man who claims that he was once a god, and they ask him, or that he asks them to help restart his religion.
Right.
And so we end up actually getting into the Blood Wars, and we use the new supplement, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, as a source book for a couple of the different adventures that we come up with. And so, yeah, and then our next episode drops a week early on Patreon next Monday, which is, remind me of that one. That was our...
was that the Stop the Wizard's Familiar?
Oh, yeah.
Save the Familiar's Wizard.
Yeah,
right?
Save the Familiar's Wizard. A familiar arrives and begs the players to go save his wizard, who is currently trapped or something like that. We come up. Right. That's another one where I think we ended up using the Yawning Portal as a foundation. Basically, we took three of the different classic adventures from Yawning Portal: White Plume Mountain, Tomb of Horrors, and the one that the Aztec one, the Temple of
some
I'm
weird
not gonna say the name because I know I'll butcher it right now. But at any rate, we take those three classic adventures and we create prologues for each one of them.
Right.
So
how to get you to White Plume Mountain.
Yeah, how to get you to White Plume Mountain. How to get you to the Tomb of Horrors. So that's just a taste of what we do in our regular show. But again, I mean, probably most of you are patrons already, so you know this. So anyway, I think it's time that I zip it and stop rambling, and we just let you decide for yourself whether or not you want to follow us or not. So I want to thank everybody for, if you've watched this, for doing that. And we will see you tomorrow for our first official episode of Legend Lore Realms of Terror Redux.
So thank you very much for sticking with us, and we will see you tomorrow.
Yep. See you tomorrow.